boys and girls. A special hello goes out to the Director of Media for the Boston Bruins alumni, Mr. Micron. Nice to see you, Marky.
Welcome to the Pro Hockey Alumni Podcast, the voice of hockey legends. This show is created to give a voice to former pro players and personalities, allowing them to share some of the greatest stories this game has to tell. So let's take a trip to the heart of the classic hockey universe and celebrate the history of the game with the select few who actually lived it. Episode 62 of the Pro Hockey Alumni Podcast features Robin Burns, one of the most entertaining and impactful people to ever play in the NHL. As a left wing for the Pittsburgh Penguins and Kansas City Scouts in the 1970s, Burns was known as a fun guy, a natural comedian, and the life of the party. But Robin was also a visionary who would eventually pioneer one of the most important hockey equipment innovations, the visor. After rising to president of Micron's skate company, Robin founded a long-shot startup called ITECH in the basement of his Montreal home. ITECH would grow into one of the three biggest hockey companies in the world. ITECH was just one of many successful business endeavors for Robin, who, in his spare time, would also become an agent for several NHL coaches, including his cousin, Pat Burns. We'll follow Robin's incredible journey from his youth in Montreal and the Montreal Junior Canadiens to the American Southwest, Hershey, Pittsburgh, Kansas City, and right through his inspirational rise to the top of the hockey business mountain. Despite his entrepreneurial success, Robin remains a humble, self-effacing guy and one of the best storytellers in hockey. I hope you enjoyed this interview as much as I did. Now, let's talk classic hockey with Robin Burns. We're back on the show with a man on the move, Robin Burns, a hard-nosed left wing in the National Hockey League with Kansas City and Pittsburgh, a successful entrepreneur, a coach's agent. A lot of people forget that right in the middle there, representing his cousin Pat Burns and Terry Murray and other coaches in the National Hockey League. But a man who's covered quite a bit of ground in hockey in general. Robin, thanks so much for being with us today.
Mark, it is my pleasure. I know we've both been running around the last few weeks. We've been trying to put this together, but finally we got it together, and it is really an honor to be on with you today.
Well, I greatly appreciate that. And I was curious, growing up in Montreal as a young man, I'm assuming that you obviously were a Canadiens fan and perhaps had the dream of playing in the National Hockey League when you get older. Is that the case? And what was it like, the youth hockey scene for yourself in Montreal at that time?
Well, I grew up in the west, the west end of Montreal. It was an area called Notre Dame de Grace, or abbreviated NDG. And I was, as a young man, I played in the parks. We didn't have artificial ice. And so we played, in the park areas, and I lived right close to this one park, actually, the famous Red Story. Lived 3 doors down from me, and he did give me a pair of skates. I was going through the alleyway, and I was on my ankles, and Red gave me a pair of skates. So
wow.
I ended up, and then in that area, they put together a top Bantam team. And I actually started as a goalie, but then they started to lift the puck. So I said, get the hell out of here. This is. And in those days, of course, no masks. So the puck would go and hit the screen behind me, and you were playing outdoors. You could hardly see the thing. I said, I know I'm stupid, but not that stupid. So I ended up playing out, and so then at Bantam they put like a whole district together called the NDG Monarchs, and I played on that team, and then after that, I played for NDG Junior B. But I was probably a very, very, very lucky person. The Montreal Forum was my home rink from the time I was 13 years old. So when you are around the Montreal Canadiens, the Montreal Royals at that time, the Junior Canadiens, and going down to Junior B, it was something. We all had a locker. We all got like the hand-me-downs from the Canadiens, from the Royals, from
wow.
So by the time by the time you got your equipment, had been well used and repalmed and everything. But it was, you know, I got my first pair of CCM tack skates, and if you ever got a pair of tack skates, that was the greatest moment of your life. So you know, the Canadiens, I signed a C card with them and got $100, which I thought was like $1 million. And I was the property of the Canadiens from the time I was 13 years old. So, of course, I was a huge fan of the Canadiens. And being at the Forum from the time you're 13, you were able to rub shoulders with some of the greatest hockey players in the world. So it was a dream of mine, and they say dreams come true, and I can verify that my dream did definitely come true.
Well, Robin, beginning in 64-65, you begin a 3-year stint with the Montreal Junior Canadiens, and a team not short on talent. You've got future Hall of Famers like Jacques Lemaire and Serge Savard, and guys like Craig Patrick, Carol Vadnais, Jude Drouin, and of course a young coach by the name of Scotty Bowman. So I was curious what that environment was like, getting groomed to eventually play in the National Hockey League and with a future legendary coach like Scotty Bowman.
Well, you know, when you hit the nail on the head, we were all, you know, young, but we were all totally engulfed in the Montreal system. As young men, we had to wear shirt and tie constantly on the road. There was no jeans. We, believe it or not, at a very young age, Scotty had us wearing fedoras, and he got us a deal on these coats. And like, we all used to take our fedora and we'd put them in our back pocket as we got off the bus, or we'd throw it on, you know, to please Scotty. But when you talk about coaches, like, you know, like just in '67 when I turned pro in Savard, like you said, Savard, Vadnais, Lemaire, Grant, Monahan, Redmond, Esposito, like, you know, you're talking about legends of the game, and you know, a lot of them went on to be former general managers, like even Larry Plow, Craig Patrick. Our team was just stacked with so much talent, and it was incredible. So it was an honor just to be on that team. And then when you had someone like Scott, we had Claude Ruel also was one of our coaches, and then Scotty Bowman. But Scotty he honed himself in junior, and when I saw him years later, he really never changed. Like everybody that I know that knows Scotty really well, that coached him, said, you know, I hated the SOB until they presented me my Stanley Cup ring. You know, like
right.
he definitely. I remember one time we were playing in St. Catharines, and Jacques Lemaire came over, and he didn't go to the red line, and he flipped the puck in, so there was an icing, and certainly they scored. And so Scotty came in and threw all the sticks at Lemaire and says, as long as I'm coaching, you'll never play a game in the National Hockey League. Well, hello. You know, here's Jacques Lemaire, probably one of the greatest, you know, on that line with Lafleur and Shutt. There was probably one of the greatest lines ever. And Bowman, he didn't care who he chewed out. He didn't care, but he had an incredible memory for situations. And he would remember games, you know, years before on such and such a play. And he'd have people like Pierre Bouchard there, but someone would be sitting on the bench and it'd be 2 minutes to go in the game. Scotty'd put them on in a situation, and you look around and you shake your head and go, what the hell he's doing? But, you know, back then we would have eaten the puck. You know, we would have gone through the boards just to make sure that the other team didn't score. So Scotty and his practices were difficult. Were you know, you had to be in shape with Scotty. He demanded certain things, but when Scotty, back when people didn't realize what line matching was doing, he would put certain combinations in it. And so Scotty was ahead of his time in junior, and then of course he just went on to probably you know, be the all-time, and I don't know if it'll ever be broken. You know, coaches in the National Hockey League, and I think he's got now with Stanley Cups after all the different teams that he was associated with. I think he's got about a dozen Stanley Cup rings or so.
Right.
So the man he was just in town here last night with Ken Dryden, and they had a big soiree. I was supposed to go, but I headed down to see my granddaughter play at the University of Vermont against Dartmouth. So I chose to head to Vermont to watch my granddaughter, but Ken wrote a book about Scotty and all of the 8 best teams that he ever coached and coached against, and so it would have been a very interesting story. But Scotty, you could sit and listen to Scotty for hours and his stories. Amazing man and an amazing career, and still going strong.
Absolutely. One thing about Scotty Bowman is he has a real appreciation for the history of the game, and really respects the tradition of the game. Although he's in the middle of it and a big part of hockey history, he always had a love of the guys who came, and appreciation of the guys who came before him. And as you said, he's still going strong. I just wanted to ask you a question. You said your granddaughter's at the University of Vermont. I'm assuming playing soccer or lacrosse?
No, she's playing hockey down there. She's a very fortunate young lady. Her name's Haley Burns, and she got a 4-year scholarship to University of Vermont. Absolutely incredible when you think about the cost of schooling, and to go down there and be lucky enough to get a scholarship. And they played last night and beat Dartmouth 4-2. It was very, very interesting game, and Dartmouth certainly were no slouches. But in the NCAA women's hockey, boy, I tell you can see some of these young ladies that going back in the initial days of women's hockey, they weren't as proficient skaters as you have today. And today, boy, I'll tell you, those young ladies, they have wheels. They can skate. So, including my granddaughter. So, and it's enjoyable hockey. So, after all is said and done, Mark, I could have gone to see Scotty and Ken Dryden last night, and know them both very well, and probably would have been entertained. But I chose as a good grandpa to head down and watch my granddaughter.
Well, that is great, because you don't have those chances often, and you never know. It's like I said,
Wow.
that's quite an accomplishment on her part. And as you noted, I was talking to somebody this weekend. We were down at Madison Square Garden. I was talking to some people. They have Amanda Kessel, one of the great U.S. players, and we were just talking about, when I've watched the pro game. We have a pro team up here in the Women's Hockey League, Pro Women's Hockey League, called the Boston Pride, and the skill level on these young ladies is fantastic. And more than that, their skill level is great, but they're all great ambassadors for the game. I think they don't have it easy, and so they have to fight for everything that they have, especially at the pro level. But they're great ambassadors, great role models, and it's a sport that, if you watch it and you're not familiar with it, you'd be pleasantly surprised. A lot of talent and a good experience, to be sure. And as you said, improving dramatically.
Look at the All-Star game last year when they had the young lady in the skating competition, and she was no slouch. She could motor as fast as any of the men on the ice. So, and I think it kind of blew the socks off a lot of the NHLers that were there on the ice. I talked to a few, and a few of them could not believe how fast she was. But just to go off track a second here, I think the NHL, in my opinion, I think the NHL is missing a golden opportunity. The NBA has done it. I think the NHL should take, these women under their wing, and each team, sponsor a women's team, because there's so many women hockey fans out there, and I think they're just missing an opportunity to really, and it wouldn't cost them that much money to have that women's professional league and take them under their wing. Anyways, that's a paid political announcement.
No, I will endorse that political announcement and say that I think it's just a matter of time. I think the product is too good, and the demand is going to be strong enough to, as you said, what they really need is the NHL to take them under their wing, get them to that next level, get them the exposure, perhaps playing more double headers, whatever it would take. And with all the TV exposure you would get and media exposure, I think that's all they need to get them to that
you name Kessel. I mean, her brother is probably one of the greatest, scorers, and you see her; she's got that touch as well. So the Kessel family, and it's not only them. You could go on and name names of all these. Haley Wickenheiser representing Canada for so many Olympics, and it's always the Olympic gold always comes down to Canada, U.S. And it's entertaining hockey. I mean, you sit and you turn on a gold medal game between Canada and U.S. You're entertained. It's it's not like a secondary sport that you're just watching because it's the Olympics. They entertain you, and there's not the hitting, but it's still rough. People don't think it's rough, but it's still rough up there.
Absolutely. It's all about body positioning, and you have to be adept at the physical game to succeed in the women's league. And again, as you said, it's not flat out checking, but you do have to be able to withstand punishment to make plays and position yourself properly. So anyway, going back to Robin Burns in your career, you end up going from that talented Montreal Junior Canadiens team to a very talented Houston Apollos team in the Central League. And I had Phil Meir on the show recently, and was talking a little bit about the experience. Now, you're a Canadian kid. You spent your entire life in Montreal. You're in Houston, Texas, playing professional hockey. What was the atmosphere like there as a hockey player?
Well, it certainly was incredible change. You grow up in this, especially in this climate here, and hockey in the winter, and certainly. The knowledge of the hockey fans is incredible, and everybody participates in hockey. And then you're heading down south to, now you all come back now. In Houston, Texas. So now you're a good old boy from Texas now, and you just and we played in the old Sam Houston Coliseum, and it wasn't a huge seating, and it was wire mesh the first year we were there, and you're there, and the top prospects of the Canadians were there, and Phil Meir and Tony Esposito, and I could list you, the top choices of all Montreal. That we were there, and then Montreal also had Cleveland Barons in the American League, but the Central League was that development league at that time. So it was an experience, and living. I'd never been in a situation where, we had a guard, Homer, in the complex where we stayed, and Homer had notches on his guns where he had shot some blacks and some Mexicans, and coming out of NBG, I'd never really faced too much racism, and back in 1967. There was a lot of it, and it was very foreign to a lot of us Canadian kids. But Houston, and I remember Christmas Day, they phoning my parents, wishing them Merry Christmas, and I think we were sitting around the pool. It was about 75 degrees, and it was just Montreal was at one of those minus 20 Christmases, and you're sitting there, and it was a different world. And so coming from as a kid growing up in an upper duplex, and then going and renting these unbelievable condos that we had down there. Excuse me. And it was your eyes. But one thing about Sam Pollock, general manager of Montreal, he was an equal opportunity employer. He didn't want to overpay anybody. So, a guy like Savard got $5,000 a sign, Lemaire $2,500, and a bunch of us got $1,500, $1,000, and he paid us all $5,000 for the year. So you think we were getting $5,000 to play hockey, and I think every one of us down there probably would have played hockey for nothing. But you look at salaries today and things. More power to all the guys. I hope they make as much money as they can. But living in Houston was a different experience. The following year, I ended up coming out and getting married, and the following year I had a son born in Houston. So I have a good old boy. I have a Texas boy in the family.
Right.
So,
well,
anyhow, it was a great experience, Mark.
I wanted to ask you about a couple of your teammates. One who we've lost recently passed away. You mentioned earlier Denny Grant. And wondering what your memories are of Denny as a person and a player.
Well, Danny from Fredericton is, Maritimers are a different breed. They're beautiful. They just open their heart to everybody. They're a part of Canada that are the most hospitable people you'll ever run into. And Danny was a true Maritimer, and he was great. And he liked his rum and coke, and he was an exceptional hockey player, and Detroit was very grateful to get hold of Denny Grant. But Mickey Redmond and Danny were buddies, playing in Pittsburgh Junior, and then they ended up, in Houston together, and so it was a friendship that lasted until Danny passed away. I think it was just a couple of weeks ago. So it was I was saddened because I knew Danny. I had lost touch over the last number of years, but I believe that year, first year in the NHL, Denny Grant and Norm Ferguson were both up for the Calder Trophy.
Right.
Norm Ferguson with Oakland, and Danny, I think, was with Montreal. I think it was Montreal. They were up for the Rookie of the Years, and both from the Maritimes, Norm from Sydney and Dan from Fredericton. I think Danny beat him out for the Calder, but two exceptional human beings. And the one thing that hockey did for me is that it certainly was an education, a world education that, like I said, you come from a district of Montreal and an upper duplex, and you get to see the different places that hockey allowed me to see. But the friendships you made were absolutely incredible, and they're lifelong friendships. Ernie Hickey came into town here with a hockey team from California a number of years ago, and he was my roommate in Houston. I mean, we played with each other, against each other, and you could sit down over a couple of beers and reminisce, and it was just like yesterday. Those type of friendships, as you've witnessed in all these alumni things with Boston and New York that you just completed. Those friendships never go away. You played with or against a lot of these guys, and they're friends for life. It's just an incredible fraternity.
Well, that's probably the best thing about hockey is that loyalty and that fraternity that seems to last forever. You really don't see that a lot in life, and the bond between the players and their teammates and the communities in which they lived is something very unique to the game.
And you see, Mark, all these guys too, charitable events. It's just people don't realize. Here in Montreal, I've been very fortunate enough, but I've run a lot of charitable events, and I actually, when I was 8 years old, I had a disease called osteomyelitis, which is a disease that eats the bone. So it's amazing that I was able to go on and play professional hockey. But I was in the Shriners Hospital, and so the Shriners have a golf tournament, and I give back every year. And I just have to, some of the biggest names, Elmer Locke, like I said, Red Story, Dickie Moore, in football here, Peter Della Riva, but the hockey players, Donnie Marshall, Dollard Saint-Laurent, I would just pick up the phone. Phil Goyette, who was still going strong, thank you, Lord, and all of these guys, I'd pick up the phone and I'd say, is there any chance you could come to this event or that event or this event? And never, ever did I have any of them if they had a conflict that was maybe another tournament. But, they all showed up at these tournaments that I helped, for years and years to promote. Mm-hmm. And they were all there. They just showed up. They never asked a dime. They played with people. They brought some different memorabilia. They signed things, Big Jean Beliveau, when he was at after he had his cancer in his throat, I had called him and I said, Sean, is it possible, for the Shriners? And he said, oh, Robin, he said, Elise, my wife, has kind of put the damper on me. He said, because, with the cancer and everything, I love the Shriners and I would be there, but Elise would kill me if I said yes, And here's the guy that was like, he had passed away after that phone call, maybe 8 months later. So 7 months, and that's the type of guy, Big Jean, Henri Richard. I have a summer place upstate in Malone, New York. Henri Richard down there, Dickie Moore came down there. You had Elmer Locke down there, Donnie Marshall. At a little community at Malone Golf Course, to raise money for the Civic Center, for the kids to have a place to play hockey.
Mm-hmm.
And here it's all the greatest of the greatest. And I think at one time at the table there, I think there was a combination of about, believe it or not, I think it was 25 or 30 Stanley Cups. And they would stand there and they'd sign and everything, and then jump in the cars and then come back home. And I'd thank them, and they said, no, Burnsy, we want to thank you. This is great, what you're doing for the kids and everything. So I can't speak enough about, the fraternity of players in my era that they're absolutely incredible. And like, I'm in my 70s now, and a lot of these guys I just mentioned have passed away. But, there's a lot that are filling in the gaps, and they're, as the Canadians, they pass the torch, to you with failing hands. And that's what we've done. Hopefully we've been good examples to a lot of the players that are coming up. We might not have made the money, to make the playoffs, made the difference between bottled beer, draft beer. But people always say, are you sorry that that you didn't, sign today? Like if you score 18 goals in the National Hockey League, you're $4.5 million player.
Yeah.
I remember Jagger signing a contract with Washington years ago. It was $11 million or something like that. He made more money in one period than I made my entire career.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at it, and people say, well, you got to be upset or jealous. I said, no, we played in an incredible era. So I'm thankful that I had the chance to play in the National Hockey League, and thankful that I met all these people, able to have been associated with all these people. I have pictures in my office of Bobby Orr sent me that, the famous one flying through the air. I got a picture of my cousin Pat holding the Stanley Cup, a picture of all the Penguin teams I played on, Kansas. Those memorabilia things are just so valuable. And it was funny, I have a picture of myself in a Penguins uniform with that multiple color blue, and it wasn't until Crosby played in that, in the outdoor game when Pittsburgh went back to the multicolor blue. A lot of my grandkids who had passed that picture hundreds of times turned around and went, oh, they call me Dauber. Oh, that's the same color as Crosby was wearing.
Right.
All of a sudden the light went on, the bell.
Those are beautiful. I was talking to somebody about that recently. When I worked for the Penguins, one of my jobs in Pittsburgh was to manage the merchandising. And the first thing that I sold and developed as we brought back, we called the Legacy line, was that blue jersey. That was back in 1993, 94, because I thought they were beautiful. And so I'm glad they've been able to revive them, and glad your grandkids can appreciate the connection now between yourself and the Penguins.
It was, like I look at these pictures as I'm talking to you now. I'm in the office in 1971, 72, and I'm looking, and there's Jim Rutherford at the end of the bench, and then 72, 73, and I look at guys, and the sad part about looking back at a lot of these things, and a lot of really good friends and players I played with over the years, and management have passed away, and that's the sad part. But the happy part is that you're sitting and you're looking at pictures, and immediately your memory bank,
Right.
goes back to certain situations, and all you can do, it has to bring a smile to your face. You can't do anything else but think of certain players, certain evenings, certain games, and I played with Eddie Shack, and I roomed with him, and you're not supposed to have phone calls. So I said, holy crap, I was like a telephone answering service, and I remember when I was playing, when he was in Buffalo, I was racing down for the puck for icing. Anyways, we touched it, and they called icing, and he turned around, he pointed at me, and he said, you won. It was the race. And Bobby Orr, same thing. When the first time I got on the ice with Bobby, when I played in the NHL, when I lined up against Bobby, and he turned, he said, holy shit, Burns, it took you long enough to get here. I said, the name wasn't Orr, so that was the type of, camaraderie that you had back then. And those things are cherished memories. So one thing that hockey has provided, it's provided me with a dream come true. I was able to be in the hockey business at a very young age, playing skates, and then I went into Micron, and we started that company, and then of course with ITECH, my own company that I ran for and owned for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at it, and like I said, and the representing coaches started by my cousin Pat Burns, God rest his soul, but it was like when you look at the ride that I've been on, and a lot of different people there. The book that was read that Tony Treasure wrote about the Kansas City Scouts. He said I should write a book, and I said, oh, half the things I couldn't print. So
no question.
You've been associated with Mark, and you know as well as I do, and a lot of people listening, that those memories are unbelievable, cherished memories.
Right, and you have the number one trait in happiness in a human being, and that is gratitude. You're grateful for what you've had and what you've accomplished. And just going back in 69-70, the Houston players, you go to the American Hockey League with the Montreal Voyageurs. And this team, the Houston team, I was going to say, the Houston teams were loaded, but this team, you've got, Guy Chiron, Jules Drouin, Bobby Sheehan, Larry Plowstill, Mark Tardif, Peter Mahovlich. You could go on and on. Al McNeil, player coach that year. Can you? What's your memory of that powerful Voyageurs team in your last year in the Montreal organization?
Well, the big thing is that we practiced before the Canadiens, like 8:30 to 10, and the Canadiens came on 10 to 11:30 or whatever. So our dressing room was just down the hall from the big team. So to strive to get down the hall was something that most players would. You just named a lot of names there that are, gone on to have incredible careers in the National Hockey League. Jack Norris went on from there. I think the following year, if memory serves me correct, I think the following year, and within 2 years, I think there was every player on that team, except for one or two, ended up in the National Hockey League, which is pretty incredible when you look at a team of 20, 22 players. When you only have two players out of an entire team that did not graduate to the National Hockey League. I mean, Bob Berry went on to LA, Jack Norris, Reggie Houle, Tardif, the players that you mentioned, all the defensemen, and the Larry Plows, like I said, all these players, they just went on, like I said, to higher levels, including myself. I was fortunate enough to, I think Canadians traded me for 24 broken sticks to Pittsburgh. I was very grateful that I was able to. And Sammy Pollock, God love him, if you weren't in Canadians' plans, he made it kind of a passion that he placed a lot of his players with NHL teams. And I think most guys, you look back and you have to be grateful for expansion, because, back in the day when I first, only had original 6, and it was pretty tough. But I mean, J. David Molson had the greatest line. You go to training camp, and you had, the Canadians had only won about 4 or 5 Stanley Cups in a row, and J. David Molson said, "There's not one job on this team that's secure," and you're looking around the room.
Right.
You get, like I said, the belly roll and the 100 shards, and so on, and then Jill Trombley and J.C. Trombley and all these.
Well, yeah.
Everybody kind of look and go, "You got to be kidding me! There's not one job secured in this team." and you kind of say to yourself, like that's a bold statement, Mr. Molson. But anyways, it was like absolutely incredible. So the Voyageurs, Sammy, he put that together. We played there. And then the following year, I think they split Montreal and Halifax, and then the year after that they went to Halifax. But it was something when you had. We played on a Friday night and we'd get 7,000. Canadians would play on a Saturday night and get 15, and the Junior Canadiens, they would play on the Sunday night and get probably about 16,000 or something. That was the era that the Junior Canadiens were outdrawing the Canadians, believe it or not.
Mm-hmm.
So it was an incredible. When you look at it, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, the Montreal Forum. Except we were the American Hockey League team, and we'd only get 7,500. but the experience with the Voyageurs again in the Montreal organization, I was very fortunate. As I said, my home week was the Forum from the time I was 13 till I was 21 years old. So it was. You look back, and I don't think I appreciated it as much as I should have.
That's understandable. You're just a young guy focused on your career at that time, and your career takes a significant turn as the Canadiens trade you to the Pittsburgh Penguins, and you spend a few years in Hershey, their American Hockey League affiliate. That team has a lot of success on the ice and a lot of fun off the ice with Frank Mathers and that legendary Bears franchise.
Well, Hershey has it probably if there's a spot in my heart that is anytime you can I still wear the Hershey Bear ring 73, the Calder Cup, and people went, is that a Stanley Cup ring? I said, no, it's American Hockey League, and I'm very proud to be wearing it because it was a time in with Pittsburgh Penguins. The expression, I was toilet seating with them. They'd bring me up, I'd send me down. They'd bring me up, I'd send me down. And finally, the final year in 73, 74, Jack Button, God rest his soul, I said, Jack, there's an expansion coming up next year, which was Kansas City and Washington. I said, why don't we just leave me in Hershey here and let me concentrate on what I can do here in Hershey and the Hershey team. And like you mentioned, the man Frank Mathers, who was a big influence on my life because Frank, he knew how to deal with men. He was the coach's coach. As Scotty Bowman was so much of a tremendous coach. Frank Mathers was an incredible hockey player in his day, but he was also an incredible coach and an incredible general manager. And he had made Chuck Hamilton, who I played with in Hershey the year before, he made him the coach. So that's always a difficult transition for any young man who was a player to then coach, people that were older than him. Ralph Keller at the time was older than him. And, so we had a team of a lot of people that were assembled. We were the Pittsburgh Farm Club, but a few other teams had sent some players there, and then Hershey also owned about 4 or 5 players themselves. So it was an incredible time, a lot of fun. I mean, the pranks that we did, oh my God! When I think it was around this time of the year, Halloween, and Bob Johnson, who was our goaler, who was Sid Abel's son-in-law, and he went up. Bob Johnson went on to the NHL and with Pittsburgh as well. And we went. I think we might have had a couple of extra pops. I'm not sure.
Probably.
It could have been a couple of extra pops, and we were knocking on the door, trick or treating, and we knocked on Chuck's door on the notes. We thought he was on a different floor, and he opened the door, and we were sitting there with a Halloween mask at about 2 a.m, and we went trick or treat. And as he opened the door, we kind of gave it this one, "Ooh, trick or treat," and we said, "I gather there's going to be too many treats." He said, "You get your ass to bed." Anyways, and we had a practice the next morning, and he skated our butts into the ice, and he skated. And Bob John, he had BJ. He must have faced about 5,000 shots at that practice. And anyways, we started to laugh afterwards, but it was about a little while afterwards. We were in Rochester, and the bus driver. We always had pretty well the same bus drivers, and we pulled up, and we were supposed to leave at like 7:30 or 8 o'clock in the morning, and the bus driver went in, and Chuck was late himself, so the driver went in to get Chuck. So I took the bus, and I sat in the driver's seat, put it into gear, drove it around the block, and hit it where on the side where we could see Chuck and the driver running out, and no bus. So I wheeled up and I opened the door, and I went, "A little late this morning."
That's great.
Needless to say, he said in maybe a little bit of foul language that you would hear in a dressing room for me to get in the back of the bus, and that was going to cost me $500 or something like that. So we got back to Hershey, called me out of the office, and he just shook his head, and we both burst out laughing. And he said, "I got to find you," but he said, "I'll tell you what, if we win tomorrow night, we'll cancel the fine." I said, "That's very nice of Chuck." But behind closed doors, he started to laugh himself. So, and those memories are just, I mean, how stupid was I thinking, here you are, 24, 25 years old, whatever it was, and you're driving a bus around the corner of Rochester.
Oh, that's funny.
So, but, those are the type of things, and the American High. But Hershey, when we won the Cup, I had a great playoff that year. I led the league in scoring, and it was just our line was Steve Andrasic, who was as tough as nails, and Jim Rytruck was a nifty centerman, and I parked my big ass in front of the net, and the pucks would go off me, and it just was one of those things. We had Dwayne Rupp was a defenseman with the Penguins, and he was sent down. So we had a lot of talent. We had young talent. We had mature talent. Ralph Keller, like I said, he'd been in the league at that time for, 15, 16 years, 17 years. And so we had the mixture. And then he had all who went on to do a tremendous NHL career. And Bob Johnson, BJ were our goalies. So we had an unbelievable team, and the wives got along, which is important. All the wives were there. All the team was there. We all enjoyed each other's company. We did crazy things, and like I said, I was fortunate enough to lead the league in scoring and in the playoffs and in goals. And Sid Abel was the general manager of Kansas City, and he had spoken to me and said, we'd be interested to draft you, and then Washington said they'd be interested to draft me, and then Jack Button came to me and he said, "Robin, I know I made you a promise that I'd leave you in Hershey, but he said I think you've matured into a hockey player that we'd like to have on the Penguins." And I said, Jack, you promised me one thing, and I said I think I'll take my chances in the draft. And then, of course, World Hockey came in, and they were trying to draft me for the Vancouver Blazers. And so I know I dealt with Sid Abel, and Sid said, have your agent call me. And I said, I am the agent, Sid.
Right.
And so he started to laugh. He said, just for doing that, he says, you're going to get a few more bucks. And I signed a 4-year deal with Kansas City, and that was phenomenal. So, Hershey was something. I have my second son born, Todd. He was born in Hershey, and my daughter was born in Montreal. So both boys ended up with dual citizenship. And my daughter's 51, my son's 50, and my other son's 47. I have 9 grandchildren, so there is my greatest legacy. But Hershey has a real soft spot in my heart. It was tremendous. I mean, we lived across the street from the Hershey Arena, and the Bachelors lived in a brown house. So it was an experience that you and I would be on the phone for 2 days telling you about all the fun and things we did there. So that was great, Mark, and thanks for asking that question.
Right. Well, you, as you said, in the playoffs, you moved through Cincinnati, Baltimore, and Providence. You win it all, and as you noted,
Cincinnati, I scored a goal at 19:59 of the third period to break a 0-0 tie, and the lights flashed, like the goal light came on and the siren went on, and I remember Bob Johnson. We were at Ummy's bar after having a couple of pops, and it was about 2 hours after the game, and Bob Johnson said, "Holy crap!" He said, "I got a shutout tonight." That's how excited we were. To win it, but 19, and that was a game we knocked Cincinnati out.
Right. Well, you, as I said, you had the relationship with Sid Abel. You parlayed your success in Hershey to landing in the expansion draft with the Kansas City Scouts, which was the original inspiration for me calling you, because I had read the book by Troy Treasure, who encapsulates the entire history of the Kansas City Scouts for those 2 years, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that. The atmosphere. This was a tough sell in Kansas City. Really, the team was underfunded, and it was going to take a while to grow that there. But again, now you're playing regularly in the National Hockey League. You're playing for Bep Giedlin, who had coached in the Stanley Cup Finals the year before with the Boston Bruins. So talk a little bit about coming to Kansas City and what that first year was like with the expansion Scouts.
Well, the Crosby Kemper Arena wasn't complete, so we had to open that year our first, I think it was 10 games on the road. So for an expansion team, I remember it was difficult. We opened against Toronto, and I led the league in penalties, and not the most auspicious opening for myself with the Kansas City Scouts. I end up with 16 minutes in penalties that opening night. Davey Keon, and I think they beat us 6-2. And Beth Quinlan, after he pulled me aside, and he said, it's nice to be aggressive, but he said, an expansion team there. He said, playing against some of these other teams, you gotta tone that down a little bit, but. It was opening night, the adrenaline's flowing. My parents got, everybody's there. And, I guess I took a few runs that I shouldn't have. But it was Kansas City was again, a dream come true, an expansion team, all the guys coming together. And Peter McDuffie, who he was playing with the Providence Reds that we beat out for the Calder Cup, and some of these guys that were on the team that he had played against for years, and Simon Nollet, who had just won the cup in Philly. So Will Fremont, who was a rookie, and he was the number one draft choice, and he was a tough kid, right, literally off the farm, and Rosie Paymont, his older brother. And we had a mixture, and then that woman behind the bench he was a really different type of coach. He was a very laid back coach. He didn't really push us, like I had a lot of different coaches, and his style was a little different for sure. And so, but my first year in Kansas City, I was fortunate enough to play with Simon and Wilf, and I scored 18 goals. And, I was on top of the world. It was a phenomenal place. The people of Canada, the actual fans that supported us were enthusiastic, and as pointed out in Troy's book, that the fan base there was a tremendous fan base, even though we didn't sell out. And I look back, and as I said in that book, I didn't think they utilized the players enough. They didn't get us out into the public enough. They didn't get us out in speaking engagements. And there was a huge amount of ownership. I think we had, in reading that book, I didn't really realize how many owners that we had. So I guess there was a little bit of problem at the management level, but one of the owners, George Shore, and Bob Fisher, he was the lawyer for the team, and George Shore, they became good friends as well as owners. And people say, well, the owners should never get too friendly with the players, but the Shore family was just, they owned Shore Tire, which was a huge tire business in multiple states, Missouri, Kansas, Missouri, and surrounding. And George Shore and his wife and his brother, they just were so hospitable, and they were wonderful, wonderful people, and they befriended us, and we returned the friendship, and it was a lot of us bought homes there, and I was surprised that the NHL pulled the pin on them, but then reading the book, you can understand a little more of the business dealings of the National Hockey League, moving it to Colorado with Jack Vickers, the owner of Vickers Oil. So it was a time, and it was a two year span that I think if things were very different, then I could put a list of the positives and negatives, and looking back as hindsight is 2020, you can always look at things and say we could have, we would have, we should have, and so on and so forth. But Kansas City was certainly a great place to play, a nice city to live in. The Kansas City Chiefs were number one. The Royals at that time were an unbelievable ball club, and the Kings, the Kansas City Kings, the basketball team was in, and so there was a lot of pro sports there, and Kansas City. We met our neighbors in Kansas City. We've been friends with for 45 years, and Linda Thompson and Bill Thompson. Linda just passed away last November, but they've been friends, and we stayed close friends, and their kids and everything for the last 45 years. So those are the type of things that hockey allowed you, that you made friendships not only with players but with people in all the different cities.
Right, and those type of things you can't buy in a store. Those type of relationships that last in that span of time.
Yeah, I mean, like I keep coming back. You've been involved in hockey most of your life, and like you said, you look back on the experiences and the places you've been, the people you've met, and everything like that. You can't help but smile and look at the past and say you were very fortunate, and as I have been.
In reading Icing on the Plains, Troy Treasure's Kansas City Scouts book, I was reminded of the fact that the 75-76 season started pretty decently for the Kansas City Scouts, actually pushing St. Louis for the division lead. It then inexplicably follows a 44-game streak in which you won only one game. So my question is, and I had this for Dennis Herron recently, and various players who've been in this situation. Is it difficult to maintain focus and intensity when you're losing night after night?
Well, it was, it's a difficult question to answer, because when you're going through it, like you lose like 2 games, you lose 5 games, you lose 10 games, and I remember a newspaper article. Someone asked me, said, "What's happening here in Kansas City?" And I said, "Well, it's a spontaneous nurturing of the fruits of disappointment." and he went, "What?" I said, "Well, instead of giving you a bunch of BS with the old cliches," I said, I thought maybe I'd spice it up a little. So you
that's for sure.
When you look at it, we instead of winning games, we would almost expect to lose a game. We would be winning 3-2, and we'd lose 4-3. I don't know. Positive breeds positive, and negative breeds negative. And we had just turned, like I said, we were almost looking for a playoff berth, and like you just said, wheels went off, but the wheels just didn't fall off; they blew off.
Right.
And to try and explain, like, it was every different game we'd screw up in a different way. It was almost virtually impossible. If you put a culmination of all the screw ups, you'd say this is impossible, but it happened. And Washington beat our record, and then years Winnipeg beat our record. So you ask the people watched, and many of the players say the same thing. And there was good players. And I remember I hurt my knee that year, and when you get you strain a ligament or something like that, you're out for a few weeks, and you come back, and it just is one of those nagging things that would never almost you'd never get the step back. But it just seemed we had 5 or 6 guys that were in that same category, where some nagging little injuries just crept up on us, and so goaltenders were changed, different people came in, different personnel, the Steve Drabanos of the world, the Phil Robertos. It was the first time I had ever witnessed. I never put that in any of the books. It was the first time I ever witnessed drugs that came into play. And Steve Drabano, God rest his soul, we were flying back to play New York, and we were flying back, and he opened his bag, and he had this bag of marijuana. I said, "Derby, what the hell is this?" And he said, "Oh, Burns, you should try it." He said, "You mellow right out." And I never tried it with him, but that was the sort of thing that crept in, and I can't say drugs was the cause, but it didn't help.
Right.
And Derby, God rest his soul, I think if you read anything up on Derby and what happened to him, and it's funny, Derby said, "Geez, Burnsy, you go to Columbia, you drop down like 25, 50 grand, and he said, you bring back this cocaine, and he said, you're set for life." Well, we all know that he went to Columbia and dropped down a lot of money and brought back a lot of cocaine, and he got caught at the border and ended up going to prison, and one thing led to another, and he passed away in Alaska. He went from bad to worse, and he passed away up there. And Derby, the booze and the drugs, as it got to a lot of players, and a lot of people in life. And that was the first time in 75, 76 that I could honestly say, first time ever that I had witnessed any sort of drugs. It was always the boys with a few beers. So Kansas City, great memories, and in reading Troy's book, there's great memories, and there was sad memories, because in the book, it certainly brought things out, people that have passed away and different things. And so, as entertaining that Troy did writing the book, it was also eye-opening. When you actually read it in print about a lot of people that you played with that are no longer with us. So all in all, like I said, I always sneak back to a smile on my face those days, and but I just there was an article that was written years ago, and I said the scouts laughing but fans not amused. Well, it must have been just so terribly difficult for fans to continue to support the team, So, anyways, it was a great time. I look back at pictures. I have long hair and a Fu Manchu.
Oh, I'll never forget the mustache. That's what I remember about you. It was so you had such a distinctive look, and
well, I never had to worry about going into any beauty contests, but that was a year of long hair and the Fu Manchus, and my grandchildren look at it and they go, "Is that really you?"
Well, it was the 70s, and the crazy 70s. During all this time, you out of necessity, perhaps, or your own entrepreneurial spirit, you're working in the off season with Lang Skates. Now, your career at 75-76 is your last year in the National Hockey League. What transpires as the team moves to Colorado with yourself? Obviously, you could hang on somewhere, but you make the decision to move on from your career. Talk a little bit about that transition to the post-career days.
Well, I would never have considered myself, I was more of a journeyman, and I had 3 kids, and I'd been working. Lucky enough, Terry Harper and Bob Lang kind of got together, and they were talking about skates. So I was working with Lang, and Terry Harper asked me to join him. He said, Burnsy, he said, you're really full of bullshit, and you can talk your way. So he said, why don't you try some of these new molded skates? And it was like a ski boot with a blade on. Anyways, I worked with Lang in the summertime, and then I went on, and a friend of mine, Phil Chiarello, who passed away, God rest his soul, he was dealing with a company in Italy, and we were looking at starting a new skate. And so when the team moved to Colorado, and you're sitting there, and when management says, in the press, well, people, don't worry, we'll get rid of most of these players and bring in some decent players. And so when they asked me, they brought in Ron Andruff and Shanahan as left wingers, and then they said to me that, well, we're gonna send you down to Providence. And I said, I don't think so. Why don't we just settle this thing and talk about George Shore and Bob Fisher with Kansas City? They flew into Colorado and represented me with Jack Vickers, and I had 2 years remaining on a contract, and Jack Vickers was a good friend of Bob Fisher, and they settled it. I think I got 95 cents on the dollar for it.
Wow.
And when I walked in to the general manager's office at the time, he was kind of blown away that Mr. Vickers actually came in and everything. He said, "I've settled with this young man," and he said to the name fails me right now, the general manager of at the time in Kansas City, and he just said, "Well, I hope you're doing the right thing by letting this young man go." So they helped me solve that, and I could have gone to Indianapolis Racers. I could have gone to but I had been working with this skate company, and we were going to start a new one. And I really, in your heart, I knew I could probably still play several more years, but I'd probably be moved around with 3 kids, and be moved around. Like when we had actually moved to Denver, and I was in there, and my kids were at that time probably in 5 or 6 different schools, and I just said, you know what, Robin, I had an opportunity to come back in the business, to not come back, but to get into the business world, and I don't have a high level of education, so it just I had to pay attention, and I learned my trade through this gentleman called Phil Shrella. We started a Micron skate company, which we ended up buying, laying out, and Phil was president. I was, for lack of a different title, I became assistant to the president, and I learned my trade. I spent time, and I learned the business. I learned sporting goods business, and I then was able to travel the world with this skate company, and we became the number one in the mobile skate world, and so we were selling to 40 some odd companies, and then after being with them for 7 years, I got nicked playing old timers hockey, and actually Red Story was a referee, and I said to Red, there's got to be something to protect players' eyes who are going to work the next day, and that's how the concept of ITECH came into being, and I retired from Micron, and it's a funny story. I was sitting there when I told my 3 kids that I was leaving Micron, and my daughter, who was 13 at the time, said, Dad, does that mean we have to move? Because I think she had a boyfriend, I don't know, something. And my young son, Todd, he said, does that mean we don't get any more free skates? and then my eldest son, Randy, who looked me square in the eye, and he said, don't you strive to be president of a company? He said, you're president of Micron right now. Why are you quitting? And I said, well, maybe one day, son, you'll understand, but it's in my heart to do my own thing. And so I ventured out on this whole thing with the full facial shield, the clear plastic shield. And so I married Technologies, polycarbonate, and one thing led to another. And I was one thing about an entrepreneur, someone says, what's a true entrepreneur? Well, you got to be kind of stupid to be a real good entrepreneur, because if you ever realized the mountain you had to climb, you'd never climb it.
No, you're totally correct. And when people romanticize entrepreneurship, they don't understand what the grind is, the risk is. You've got a family to take care of. You've had a secure position and a high position with a successful company. You've got a great idea, though, and you know it's viable. However, getting it done, I found it fascinating reading about the certification process where you had 2 huge potential disasters, and then you have to really believe this to keep going. So for people who are out there who are starting businesses, who have businesses, it's a good lesson to learn. So in 2 different occasions, number one, everything's created, you're ready to go, you're testing it, and it's kind of like it's edging down at the players' noses, which you can't get certified because of that. The other time, because it's a molding issue, I'm just giving you generals as I remember the story, you have a big, they crash on the floor of the warehouse and splinter apart. The bottom line is, in order to, that's where the rubber meets the road in entrepreneurship. That's where most people, maybe myself included, would have said, I can't do this. This is crazy. But you keep going. Talk a little bit about that perseverance, some of those challenges, the monumental challenges you had to get through that experience and make ITECH the huge success that it has been.
Well, the biggest thing, Mark, as I said, you can't be that smart. And I remember going. We had because of the molecular structure of polycarbonate, and what happened was that the formula at the manufacturing level, and the first time the shield, it when I fell on the floor, and here you get a protective eye shield, and it shatters. So I could have renamed the company the Phoenix. So I just said and I went to bed, and I'm a pretty strong Christian, and I kind of just said, Lord, I said, I'm not that bright. I said, and you seem to be fairly sharp. So I said, you know what, big guy, whatever it is, I said, I'm going to wake up in the morning. I'm going to wake up in the morning, and I'm going to continue this thing, and you could maybe help me. And I said, if it's not meant to be, it's not meant to be. And I always had the confidence in myself, Mark, that I was the best salesman I've ever met. So I could get a job selling. So I knew I could feed my family getting a job in the sporting goods world because I knew so many people, and because of my bullshit, I could sell a lot of different products, and I was fairly knowledgeable about the sporting goods industry at that time. But the big thing was, I 100% didn't want to fail, because I said, this thing, there's answers. And when you feel in your heart that you could still go, I felt in my heart when to retire from hockey, it was the right thing to do. And the same thing with this, it was the right thing to do. And I persevered and went through it and got certification and went on. And like I said, the story of a lot of this stuff could take a lot of time. But the bottom line is that I can always say that I had the confidence in myself. That was the number one thing. Like I said, I might be full of bullshit, but I always had the confidence in myself to be able to. And the biggest thing is, someone said to me, Bernsey, how the hell did you become so smart? And I said, I'm not smart. I surround myself like a Henry Ford. Mm-hmm. I surround myself with a lot of smart people. And I never, ever failed from that, where I hired a lot of smart people that were a lot smarter than I was, ever pretended to be. And these people were the ones that helped me with the success of ITECH. We went on from there. I had the full shield, the half shield, the three-quarter shield. I pioneered so many different products. A product called Jock Plus, which was a combination of a jock and the Velcro. Pioneered in the goalie mask. When I finally sold the company 20 years later, we owned 80% of the world goalie mask business. Wow. People don't realize I was a pioneer in a lot of these baseball masks, that they look like a goalie mask. I was making masks for baseball companies that nobody knew I was making. And so I started a company called Mountain View Bag, of which I'm in the office right now. My son owns it, Todd owns it, and Mountain View Bag, I was over in China, and the hockey bags, and people were buying a ton of bags. So I said, well, what the hell, why not start a bag company and all important? And people went, Bernsey, how come your bags are so inexpensive? But people didn't realize I own the bag company, like this. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of things that I took advantage of, and when I finally, Bob Negley, God rest his soul, who was the coach, not the coach, but the owner of the Minnesota Wild, and Kevin Compton was also the owner of the Sharks, San Jose Sharks, and both those men were successful entrepreneurs, and so I was a bloodsucker of knowledge, and I learned from people like that, and I just then parlayed that through, and when I sold the company, I made a ton of money that I never expected. I still haven't told my wife how much. But after all, in the business world has changed so much today because of the internet and the fast moving and things. But back then, when I was at the peak in the business world, it was relationships that relationships with either people in China or people are, all over the world. I sold to 42 countries, and when I sold it, we were approximately the third biggest hockey company in the world. And people were shocked to hear that. So, but quietly, you stick handle quietly. You don't step on the big Nikes or the Adidas toes, and so you can stick handle through. And so that was how the business career took off, and certainly the same thing applied to when I was representing, the different coaches. So it started with Pat Burns and Jacques Laperriere, and then it went on. Like I said, I ended up representing Terry Murray and John Tortorella, Dave King, Michel, Teddy, Alain Vigneault, Guy Charon. At the top of my head, I'm trying to remember. There's other ones, and I remember when I negotiated with Pat Burns with Boston. Mike O'Connell was the general manager, but Harry Simmons was pulling the shots, and so I remember we were sitting there, and we had pretty well settled on a bunch of things, but there was a whole. I knew Harry didn't want to break the $1 million barrier for a coach, so like Harry was different. And he turned to me once and he said, "Can Pat be a Bruin?" And I said, "Harry, I grew up in Toronto, Maple Leafs fan. Are you a Bruin?" And he said, "Yeah, I like that answer." And then I remember the young, I said, the young lawyer that I was in there, and he couldn't believe that I didn't have a law degree. I said, "I didn't know you needed a law degree to negotiate a contract." And the guy said, "Well, I just surmised." I said, "No, are you kidding?" I said, "My best 3 years of high school were grade 8. You look at it all, and after all is said and done, and then Harry had a press conference at 11, and Pat was waiting in a taxi. We went there at 10, and I had another 5 or 6 items to complete. And so I knew that the cameras were waiting at 11 o'clock, and so I got a hell of a lot done between quarter to 11 and 5 to 11, So, and that was through reading a book about the Second World War, where the Japanese bought a villa and the Americans rented 3 floors of a hotel. Now, the Japanese were there to get the best deal, and they were there to stay for as long as it took. So, in business as in life, I've been very, very fortunate. My greatest legacy is, I say, my 9 grandchildren, 5 granddaughters, and 4 grandsons. And so I've been fortunate. 3 of the girls have scholarships down in the States for different sports. The boys are, in universities. My youngest in high school. The young boys are in high school and playing. I'm going to a football. They're playing for city championship on Friday, and that is, to me, that's the greatest legacy of my entire life. Is my wife is number one. She's stuck with me through. Like I said, when we started the company, I wrote the book on 27 different ways of barbecuing spam. So the last 3 was without spam. So I've been fortunate. We've been together 55 years, and we've been very fortunate, like 3 kids and 9 grandkids. So that in a nutshell is probably what it's all about. It's just right place, right time, right situation, right bullshit, and that's pretty well. It's all she wrote. When they plant me, they can always say, "Hey, I enjoyed it. I ran my road, and I've done a lot of crazy things, good things, but I've done a pretty good job going all around."
No question. A series of crossroads in your life and your career, and making good decisions. The end result, of course, is the most difficult thing, and the most challenging is to produce quality children who are contributing to society, and you've done that, and now you have a full crew of grandchildren as well. So you can look back, and your legacy in life and in hockey in particularly, well beyond your hockey playing career, of course, and your impact is significant. You're not a person who tends to slow down at all. So aside from your family, what's going on with Robin Burns these days?
Well, I do, as my wife says, I do a tremendous amount of charitable work. I like I said, I have diarrhea of the lips, and I do a lot of public speaking, and I do a lot of charitable golf tournaments, and I do these crazy auctions at tournament where I embarrass everybody at the tournament to get off their wallet and get off their ass and give money, and so I do a lot of that. I'm still in a few business ventures that keep me busy. I come into the office. My son, give me a little office off to the side. I shouldn't say little; it's a nice big office. So I have all the computerization and everything that you need today, and I keep myself busy, and I'm trying now not to invest as much as divest of a lot of the different things that I've accumulated, and I try to help. I started in memory of my sister. We have called Nazareth Community. It's a couple of houses downtown Montreal for people with some mental problems, and I donate a lot of money and my time to the Nazareth Community and Anne's House, where it's a home for people off the street. And as I said, I was just in Chicago, and it saddened me to see so many homeless people laying in the streets, and it was 46 Fahrenheit in Chicago, and it was raining and cold, and I try to give back as much as I can. I sat on the board of Pro Cure, which is we started this March walk to people with prostate cancer. A friend of mine passed away with prostate cancer, so I jumped on that bandwagon and got a lot of got the Canadiens involved, the Alouettes here involved, the Impact, the soccer team involved, and I knew all these people. So, and with a priest friend of mine, Father John Walsh, I said, John, between everyone you know and I know, so we kind of put that together and got that going, and we raised a lot of money for that. So we raised a lot of money for Shriners, raised a lot of money for Youth Unlimited. A lot of the youths, people they hit 18 years old and they're thrown out in the streets and everything like so. I'm trying to give back as best as I can, financially and time wise, and a few businesses here and there. And a lot of people come to me with these entrepreneurship type of ideas and think this will work. And I don't pull punches. I tell people, I tell a lot of people, and then there's a lot of people, they fly like an eagle and shit like a pigeon. So, they come in, they get this grandiose things, and I'm gonna spend this, spend that. And I say, well, that's great, because that's already been done in the hockey world, the sports world, and so I keep myself very busy. I come into the office pretty well every day, but I'll come in at 9:30 and bring in a lunch and shoot the crap with people in the office here, and then I'll head home, and I still try and work out a little bit because I'm still a fat crap, so I try to keep busy and work out. Trainer comes over a few times a week and slaps me around, so I get 2 artificial knees, artificial hips. I get 2 hernia operations. So when I drive by an airport, the bells go off. So I've been fortunate. I still golf. So I'm a shitty golfer, but I still golf.
Right.
And everybody cheats at golf, and I catch them all. And they said, "Oh no, they don't cheat." Until I said, "Well, you sure you don't cheat?" Anyways, people are, "Oh, I don't cheat." Hello. So anyways, that's kind of been what Robin Burns and family's been up to the last number of years. So
Well, no doubt. Yeah, as I said earlier, a man on the move, a moving target. We're so glad you were able to spend the time. And we went, like I said, we went overtime, but it was well worth it. A lot of life lessons to learn in here. And it was very entertaining and fascinating interview. And Robin, we thank you so much for putting the time aside for us today.
No, Mark, I thank you for giving me the opportunity to shoot the crap with you like this. It brings back, what you do is you interview me and I go down memory lane, and I don't even know how long. We probably spent an hour and a half, whatever it was. But as you can see, I've had a great run, and I enjoy life, and I enjoy work. I enjoy my family, and I enjoy, the pops, and I enjoy an interview like this very much. And I thank you for giving me the opportunity to shoot the crap with you.
Great. Thank you so much. Greatly appreciated. Hope to talk to you again soon. And thank you, and continued good health and good success to you and your family.
You as well.
Thanks for listening to the Pro Hockey Alumni Podcast, the voice of hockey legends. Just a reminder to please consider giving the show a rating and or review on Apple Podcasts. The link is in the show notes. These ratings and reviews help us become a lot more visible and make the show more accessible to hockey fans everywhere. I personally read all the reviews and greatly appreciate them all. If you have thoughts or suggestions for the show, you can contact us through our website at prohockeyalumni.org, or be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Pro Hockey Alumni. Thanks for listening.